The mobster leaned back in his chair, smirking. "So you're the dead brother's replacement, huh?" The room went silent. Everyone expected Jeff Buckley to explode, to walk out, to show some kind of reaction. What he did instead didn't just surprise everyone in that Chicago nightclub, it changed how a dangerous man thought about power, respect, and what real strength actually looks like. Chicago, November 1994. The Green Mill Cocktail Lounge on Broadway, the same venue where Al Capone used to conduct business. Dark wood paneling, red velvet booths, the kind of place where jazz legends played and dangerous men made deals. Tonight, it's hosting an unexpected guest, Jeff Buckley, in town for a radio interview drawn by the club's musical history. Jeff sits at the bar nursing a beer, just listening to the house band. He's not performing tonight, just absorbing the atmosphere, the history in these walls, the music, the energy, the stories these brick walls could tell. He's always been drawn to places like this, venues with soul, with genuine character, where real music happened. At a corner table sits Vincent Romano, a man whose reputation precedes him everywhere he goes. Mid-50s, built like a boxer gone soft, wearing an expensive suit that can't hide the violence in his eyes. He's been watching Jeff for 20 minutes, recognizing him from somewhere, trying to place the face. Vinny runs numbers for the Chicago outfit, not the boss, but close enough. The kind of man who solves problems with intimidation first, violence second, charm never. He's killed 3 men that the FBI knows about, probably more they don't. Tonight he's here with his crew, 5 other men who do whatever Vinny tells them to do. But wait, this gets much more interesting. Vinny finally places Jeff's face. He's seen it in magazines, music publications. His daughter reads. The dead singer's son, Tim something. Buckley. That's it. The kid who died young, left behind this curly-haired replacement, trying to fill shoes that were buried in the ground. Vinny signals to his men, time to have some fun. Jeff notices the approach before it happens. 5 men moving with purpose across the club floor, their body language aggressive, predatory. The kind of movement he's learned to recognize from growing up in working-class neighborhoods, from playing in rough clubs where musicians weren't always welcome. Vinny stops directly behind Jeff's barstool. Close enough that Jeff can smell his cologne mixed with cigarette smoke and something else, the scent of a man who's comfortable with violence. "You're Tim Buckley's kid, right?" Vinny's voice carries across the suddenly quiet section of bar. Jeff turns slowly, makes eye contact. "I'm Jeff Buckley." "Yeah, that's right." "The replacement." Vinny grins, showing teeth that have been capped too many times. Must be tough, trying to be somebody when the real talent's 6 feet under. The bartender freezes. Other patrons suddenly find their drinks very interesting. This is the moment when things usually go bad, when pride meets disrespect and somebody ends up bleeding. And Jeff takes a sip of his beer, says nothing. Vinny interprets the silence as weakness. Moves closer. "I knew your old man's music, real stuff, had balls. What do you got?" Some pretty boy voice singing sad songs for college kids who don't know what real music sounds like. Still, Jeff says nothing. Just looks at Vinny with those dark eyes, calm and patient, like he's studying something curious rather than being insulted. This is where most people would expect the explosion. The angry defense, the wounded pride turning into confrontation. But Jeff Buckley isn't most people. Here comes the moment that changes everything. Vinny, encouraged by what he thinks is submission, decides to go for the kill shot. The cruelest thing he can think to say. "You know what I heard? I heard your brother Scott died of an overdose, couldn't handle the pressure of being related to real talent. That gonna be your story too, pretty boy? You gonna check out early when you realize you can't measure up to dead men?" The bar goes completely silent. The house band notices the tension, starts playing quieter. This crossed a line that nobody crosses. You don't speak about someone's dead family, especially not like that. Especially not when the family died young and tragic. Everyone waits for Jeff's reaction. His face is calm, but his hands have stopped moving. He sets down his beer with deliberate care, turns fully to face Vinny, and then he speaks, quietly. So quietly that Vinny has to lean in to hear. "You know what's interesting about your comment?" Jeff's voice is steady, conversational, like he's discussing the weather. It tells me everything I need to know about you and nothing about my brother. Vinny frowns. This isn't the reaction he expected. Jeff continues, still speaking in that same calm tone. Scott died when he was 27. Heroin overdose. You're right about that. But here's what you don't know. He wasn't running from talent or pressure. He was running from pain, the kind of pain that comes from growing up without a father who left before you could remember his voice. The room is dead silent now. Everyone listening. See, when our father died, Scott was 8. I was barely walking. Different mothers, same absent father, same hole where guidance should have been. Scott tried to fill that hole with music, with drugs, with anything that would make the emptiness feel smaller. Jeff pauses, takes a sip of his beer. His hand is completely steady. But you know what Scott wasn't? He wasn't weak. It takes strength to hurt that deeply and keep trying to create beauty. It takes courage to feel everything so intensely in a world that tells you to feel nothing. Scott had more courage in his damaged heart than most people have in their entire bodies. Vinny is starting to look uncomfortable. This isn't going how he planned, and here's what really interests me about your comment. Jeff continues. You think pain is weakness? You think sensitivity is something to mock? But you know what I see when I look at you? Jeff leans forward slightly, still calm, but now there's something else in his voice. Authority. I see someone so afraid of feeling anything real that you have to surround yourself with 5 other men just to have a conversation with one guy sitting alone at a bar. I see someone so terrified of vulnerability that you attack other people's pain to avoid looking at your own. Now you haven't seen the most shocking part yet. Vinny's face is getting red. His crew is shifting nervously. This is supposed to be their boss intimidating some musician, not getting psychoanalyzed. What did you just say to me? Vinny's voice has an edge that usually makes grown men apologize immediately. Jeff doesn't flinch. I said you're scared, and the reason you made that comment about Scott isn't because you're strong. It's because you recognize something in his story that terrifies you. You don't know nothing about me, pretty boy. I know you're probably my father's age. I know you've been watching me for 20 minutes trying to decide whether to start trouble. I know you brought 5 men with you to talk to one person, and I know you chose to mock a dead 27-year-old's struggle with addiction. Jeff takes another sip of beer. Those choices tell a story, Vinny. They tell me you understand exactly what kind of pain drives someone to heroin, because you felt it too. The name catches Vinny off guard. He didn't introduce himself. How do you know my name? Because men like you have a type. The expensive suit that doesn't fit quite right. The crew that's trying too hard to look casual. The need to establish dominance over someone who's not threatening you in any way. This is Chicago. You're connected. Your name is probably Vincent something Italian. And guys like you are always called Vinny. For the first time since the conversation started, Vinny looks uncertain. But here's what I really want to know, Vinny, Jeff says, his voice getting even quieter. What happened to your Scott? What? Every man who attacks someone else's dead brother with that particular kind of cruelty has his own dead brother. Maybe literally, maybe metaphorically. But something died in your world that you couldn't save. Something you loved that got destroyed. And every time you see someone else's loss, it reminds you of your own. Vinny's jaw tightens. You don't know what you're talking about. Maybe not. But I know you didn't come over here to talk about music. You came over here because seeing someone grieve publicly makes you uncomfortable. Because you've never learned how to grieve properly yourself. The absolute silence in the bar is deafening. The house band has stopped playing entirely. So here's what I'm going to do, Jeff says, standing up slowly. He's not tall, not physically imposing, but something about his presence fills the space. I'm going to tell you about Scott. Really tell you. Not the tragedy version, the human version. Vinny starts to object, but Jeff continues. Scott was funny, wickedly funny. He could make me laugh until my sides hurt just by doing impressions of our mother's boyfriends. He taught me how to palm a coin when I was 7. He showed me how to listen to music, really listen, by putting on headphones and closing your eyes and letting the sound wash over you like water. Jeff's voice gets warmer, more personal. He wrote letters to our father even though Tim was dead, long letters about what he was learning, what he was struggling with, what he hoped for. He never sent them, obviously. But he wrote them because he needed a father so badly that he kept talking to a ghost. Something shifts in Vinny's expression. The aggression is fading, replaced by something harder to identify. The heroin wasn't weakness, Vinny. It was a desperate attempt to stop hurting. Scott felt everything: love, loss, hope, disappointment, at twice the intensity of normal people. The drugs were his way of turning down the volume on a world that was too loud, too sharp, too much. Jeff pauses. He taught me that sensitivity isn't something to cure. It's something to channel. That's why I make music, not to replace him, not to compete with our father, but to honor what Scott showed me, that feeling deeply is a gift, even when it hurts. The bar is completely still. Nobody moves, nobody speaks. So when you mock my dead brother, Jeff says, looking directly at Vinny, you're not insulting weakness, you're mocking courage. The courage to love something so much that losing it breaks you. The courage to feel pain instead of inflicting it, and that's when the impossible happens. Vinny sits down, not aggressively, not to establish dominance. He sits down like a man who's suddenly tired, who's carrying weight he's forgotten how to set down. I had a son, Vinny says quietly. The admission surprises everyone, including Vinny's own crew. Tommy would have been about your age now, lost him when he was 16. Car accident. Jeff nods, doesn't say anything, lets the space hold the confession. After that, Vinny shakes his head. After that, I couldn't stand seeing other people's kids succeed, especially kids who reminded me of him. Made me angry. Made me want to hurt them before they could hurt you by being what he'd never get to become. Jeff finishes. Vinny looks up sharply. How do you know that? Because that's what grief does when you don't let yourself feel it properly. It turns into anger. And anger is easier to carry than sadness, because anger makes you feel powerful instead of helpless. Vinny stares at Jeff for a long moment. You really believe that? That feeling things is stronger than shutting them out? I know it is. Because shutting them out turns you into someone who attacks strangers in bars for reminding you of what you've lost. And feeling them turns you into someone who can make music that helps other people feel less alone. Jeff sits back down, signals the bartender for another beer. Tommy played guitar, Vinny says suddenly. Had talent, real talent, was going to audition for some music school in New York. What was his favorite song? Jeff asks. The Times They Are A-Changin', Dylan. Played it over and over until I thought I'd go crazy. Jeff nods. Good song. Song about hope, disguised as a warning. Tommy had good taste. For the first time in the conversation, Vinny almost smiles. Yeah, he did. They sit in silence for a moment. Around them, the bar slowly starts to come back to life. Conversations resume. The house band starts playing again, softer than before. I owe you an apology, Vinny says finally. What I said about your brother that wasn't right, apology accepted. But you don't owe it to me. You owe it to Scott's memory, and to Tommy's. Vinny nods slowly. How do you do it? How do you carry that pain without it making you mean? Music helps, but mostly I try to remember that the pain is proof the love was real. Scott's addiction doesn't erase the fact that he was my brother and I loved him. Tommy's death doesn't erase the 16 years you had him. Jeff takes a sip of his new beer. The goal isn't to stop hurting. The goal is to hurt in a way that honors what you've lost instead of destroying what you still have. Vinny looks around the table at his crew, who are watching this exchange with fascination and confusion. Tough guys don't usually discuss feelings with musicians in public bars. You know what's funny? Vinny says. I came over here to make you feel small. Instead, you made me remember what it feels like to be human. That's what music is for, Jeff replies. Not to make people feel small, but to make them feel connected, to remind us that everyone's carrying something heavy, and maybe if we share the weight, it gets a little lighter. Vinny stands up, extends his hand. Jeff shakes it. You're all right, Jeff Buckley. Nothing like what I expected. What did you expect? Some spoiled kid trading on his father's name. Instead, I met someone who actually learned something from his pain. Vinny turns to his crew. We're leaving, and if any of you ever disrespect this man or his music, you answer to me. As they file out, Vinny turns back to Jeff one more time. That song Tommy loved, The times they are a-changin', I haven't listened to it since he died. Maybe it's time. Jeff nods. Maybe it is. And Vinny, Tommy would be proud of the man you chose to be tonight. After they leave, the bartender comes over to Jeff. Jesus Christ, man. I've never seen anything like that. Vinny Romano doesn't back down from anyone, ever. How did you know what to say? Jeff finishes his beer. I didn't know what to say. I just knew what not to say. And sometimes that's enough. The story spreads quickly through Chicago's music scene. The night Jeff Buckley turned a mobster into a human being with nothing but honesty and compassion. The night violence was prevented, not by superior force, but by superior understanding. But the real impact is on Vinny Romano. 2 weeks later, he goes to his son's grave for the first time since the funeral, brings a small portable radio and plays The Times They Are A-Changin', sits there for 2 hours, finally letting himself cry for the boy who wanted to change the world with music. 6 months later, Vinny starts a scholarship fund for young musicians from Chicago's South Side, kids who have talent but not opportunity. Kids like Tommy would have been if he'd grown up in a different neighborhood. The scholarship is called the Tommy Romano Memorial Fund for Young Musicians. The first recipient is a 16-year-old guitarist whose mother died of an overdose, whose father left when he was 8, who plays music to fill the holes in his heart. Just like Scott Buckley did. Just like Jeff Buckley still does. When local newspapers ask Vinny why he started the fund, he gives them a quote that nobody expects from a man with his reputation. A musician taught me that pain shared is pain diminished. My son loved music, and music gives kids hope. Maybe some other parent won't have to lose what I lost, but he never mentions Jeff Buckley by name. Some gifts are too sacred to publicize. 5 years later, when Jeff dies in Memphis, Vinny Romano attends the funeral, doesn't introduce himself to the family, doesn't make a scene, just stands in the back, pays his respects to the man who reminded him that strength and kindness aren't opposites. They're the same thing expressed through different choices. The scholarship fund continues to this day. Hundreds of young musicians have received support because one night in Chicago, a dead brother's memory was honored instead of mocked, and 2 men in pain chose connection over conflict. That's what Jeff Buckley understood that night. That the moment someone attacks your deepest wound, you have 2 choices. You can attack back, or you can heal forward. You can mirror their cruelty, or you can model something better. Jeff chose to heal forward. And in doing so, he didn't just change Vinny Romano's night, he changed Vinny Romano's life. And through him, hundreds of other lives that would be touched by Tommy's memorial fund. The most powerful response to cruelty isn't greater cruelty. It's deeper humanity. That's what Jeff Buckley taught a dangerous man in a Chicago bar, and that's what the dangerous man learned to teach the world. Sometimes the strongest thing you can do is refuse to be reduced by someone else's pain. Sometimes the most revolutionary act is responding to darkness with light. That's what happened when a mob boss made a joke about Jeff Buckley's dead brother, and Jeff chose grace over rage. The conversation lasted 20 minutes. The impact lasted the rest of their lives. But there's more to this story, because what happened that night in Chicago rippled outward in ways nobody could have predicted. 3 days after the Green Mill encounter, Jeff was back in New York when he received an unexpected phone call. The voice was gruff, unfamiliar. "This is Tony Romano. Vinny's my uncle." Jeff waited, unsure where this was going. "I heard about what happened at the Green Mill, what you said to him. I wanted you to know my uncle's been different since that night." "That are different." Tony explained that Vinny had called him the next morning, something he'd never done before, just to check in. To ask how Tony's kids were doing in school, to actually listen to the answers. "See, my uncle's been carrying Tommy's death like a weapon for 8 years, using it to hurt other people because he couldn't stand being the only one in pain. But after talking to you, I don't know what you said, but he's been acting like he remembers how to be human." Jeff found himself deeply moved by this unexpected phone call. Your uncle is a good man dealing with an impossible loss. He just needed permission to grieve instead of rage. Well, whatever you did, thank you. The family's been waiting 8 years for him to come back to us. I think maybe now he will. 2 weeks later, another call. This time from a woman named Maria Santos, director of a youth center on Chicago's South Side. "Mr. Buckley, I hope you don't mind me calling. I got your number from a friend at Columbia Records. I wanted to talk to you about Vincent Romano. Jeff's heart skipped. Had Vinny changed his mind? Was there trouble? He came to our center last week, Maria continued. Said he wanted to start a music program for at-risk kids. Wrote us a check for $50,000 on the spot. When I asked why, he said,